Okay, welcome to Learn Robotics and AI podcast, and I'm really excited to talk to Isaac Griffith today, who is a professional at Proactive Global. And today we'll be talking a lot about how to start your career in robotic software engineering and what are the things that you should watch out for when you're really applying for jobs. I mean, whether it's for beginners or for intermediate positions. Um, how to really search for companies, apply for companies, and what are the things you should really prioritize, what are the things that are maybe not so valuable, and things of that nature. So, maybe Isaac, let's start with a short introduction of yourself. And I'm super glad that we're having this conversation there today.
Great. Yeah, no, thank you. It's a pleasure coming on your podcast. Appreciate the invitation. As you mentioned, really keen to discuss how we can assist either beginners into the robotic space or people at mid-level or even experienced level get into the industry. It's an industry in high demand, as I'm sure you know. So I'm really keen to discuss and look forward to taking this further. So, as a quick explanation, as you briefly mentioned there, I specialize within the robotics and automation space as a headhunter. So, we would work with a variety of customers from end customers or retailers. We would describe them as through to large integration businesses, right the way through to startups and VCs as well. So, the full kind of broad spectrum of customers we work with. And that's on a global scale as well. So myself, I'm based in London, which is technically our main headquarters, but we also have offices in Krakow, in Poland, in Atlanta, US, South Africa, Melbourne, Australia, and we have one office in India as well.
Hmm. So it's pretty international. It's spread all across the globe. Proactive
Absolutely.
Global is also in the name, so that makes a lot of sense.
The
And
name.
in which countries do you think there are more automation and robotics job opportunities in general? Having dealt with probably clients from all over the world.
Absolutely, it's a very good question. I wouldn't want to annoy any of my friends and my colleagues on the other side of the Atlantic, but I think there's definitely a strong battle. I would probably say the region that I work in predominantly in my team is Europe. Of course, we have offices in Atlanta that covers the US market as well. I could be wrong. I don't want to, it's a very bold statement to make, but I'd probably say a lot of the tech and the innovation probably comes from the US and then maybe Asia,
Hmm.
and then maybe that comes into Europe a few months later. However, I'm sure we'll discuss later. I think definitely Germany. You got some hotspots, some very good technical universities that are breeding
Hmm.
a lot of exciting talents, I guess you can call it. And then in terms of other places in Europe as well, you have the hotspot in Austria, which is Graz. Very infamous university, again breeding great robotics programs and automation and engineering programs. And then in the Nordics as well, in Odense, you have a few uh, startups, or a lot of startups, sorry, within the robotics and the automation, the AI world. So, to answer your question, I'm not exactly sure
Yeah.
the number one, right? But definitely the US. You've definitely got Germany,
Mhm.
Austria, and then the Nordics for sure.
Yeah. That's also what I would assume. I think in Europe, Germany is probably the biggest player. I think it has probably the most number of robotics companies. Of course, that is still less as compared to US. I mean, you mentioned US is also one of the key players there. Yeah, interesting. So, what does your day-to-day work look like? Like, what kind of things? I know that you travel a lot for work as well. So, what kind of activities are you generally involved in that you do on a day-to-day basis?
Cool. So I've been with Practice for coming up to 8 years now. I think 7 years and three quarters to be specific. On a day to day, the team that I look after and what I do in my job function is essentially canvassing new customers and exploring new opportunities within the robotics and automation space. So as you mentioned, I travel a lot, which is awesome personally and from a career development point of view. I would be traveling to different customer facilities, speaking with, as I mentioned earlier, either startups or large enterprises that are developing their robotics, their automation strategy in the next 5 to 10 years, and obviously road mapping inside that. where the top talent they need to develop their business. So I would go to X customer and they would say, okay, we need to grow by this amount. And then that would obviously start in most cases by me looking to find them either junior sales manager, senior sales manager, or a VP of sales or anything in between. Once this Fed company has the order revenue, has the sales, has a strong project pipeline, then it comes through to the project delivery and the project execution, right? So that's when the project managers, solution developers, and obviously the software and the automation implementation comes from there as well.
Okay. So I think it starts with the discussion or conversation with the company and trying to understand what they are looking for. And then you make a plan or a roadmap for them in terms of what kind of people you want to hire or what kind of positions that they would want to fill. Do you also propose that you need, 3 or 5 different profiles of people, or do they suggest that, hey, we are looking for, let's say, a robotics specialist or a product manager or things like that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a bit of both. So, as I mentioned, maybe a startup that's a bit newer into the space, they wouldn't necessarily be aware of what they want, and that's my job and the team's job to advise them and say, hey, this is what I would recommend with the size of your business and the targets that you're looking to achieve in the next 5 to 10 years, and I'd assist them and say, yeah, you might need X, Y, and Z. Or in some cases, if the organization is a bit more established, they've made quite a few experienced hires before, they might come to us and say, right, I've done some market research. I know the gap in my team. I know we need this position. And then we'd put a plan together with them to help headhunt said person.
Okay, yeah, yeah, that sounds reasonable, and then so this is let's say this would be for a company that would let's say a startup. So I want to take like a simplistic, overly simplified case study to see this in action. Let's say, so if a startup approaches you, and let's say it's a robotic manipulation or a robotic navigation based startup, and it's relatively new, and they are trying to build products. They have a customer, sort of potential customer in mind, but their product is not ready yet. They're in the process of doing it. Maybe they have a couple of developers or something, but that is it. I think that also is what happens generally. If a startup, let's say, is spinning off from a university, they probably have a researcher or an engineer, and assisted by the professor probably as a bit. Um, but apart from that, they do not have any sense of the business side of things, right? So how would you approach, let's say, this simplistic case study?
So that's a very good point you touched on there, and something that we're coming across a lot, just in terms of finding the balance in your team and really evaluating what you need. There's other areas as well that really need to be taken into consideration, but the strongest links, especially when in a startup environment, is really the balance between the strong sales network and then the product itself, right? Because you need strong sales individuals to push your market out, especially in a startup environment, but they can't be selling rubbish. You need to have a very, very strong product, and vice versa. If you've got a great product, but maybe not very good salespeople in your team, then it doesn't matter how good the product is if the salespeople aren't effective, or going after the correct target customer in the right way, then again, you're going to fail. So in that example, especially in a startup space, if you're trying to target a specific company, yeah, in terms of hiring and recruiting, really need to be aware of what your product is, defining your product. And from a hiring point of view, that's getting the right people in, analyzing the right universities to get that top talent in, really nail down your strategy in terms of how your product's going to develop in the next 5 to 10 years as well. And then on the flip side, as I mentioned, once you have got that product in place, then you need the sales team to go up to market and really push that forward.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. You also mentioned that you look for the top talent from the top universities and stuff. So I think a major role, a major part of your work involves finding experts, right? So of course you also work with beginners and intermediary candidates, let's say. But how do you analyze and find out the right fit for the position? So if they're looking for, let's say, a robotics navigation engineer who would help them build the pipeline from scratch, maybe it's a semi leadership or a tech lead position. How would you find out these people, and what kind of things you really look for in such candidates before you make the
So it's
judgment?
Well, I think it's going to be probably a hot topic and a key word for the majority of this podcast, but it's through networking and definitely through LinkedIn is one of the
Hmm.
biggest tools that we use to headhunt or find these people. Yes, being a recruitment or a headhunting organization, we have a very strong database as well. We've been an organization for over 20 years, operating globally, so we have access to very very strong talent. It maybe isn't actively looking, but the main point is through networking and through LinkedIn as well. So we'd target, like I said, we'd sit down, we'd do the roadmap with the organization in regards to what they are looking for. Once they have defined their role, then yeah, it's about us to network, to go onto LinkedIn, to really headhunt that person, make sure they're suited for the role, conduct interviews, and then present them to the customer.
Okay, okay, okay. Yeah, that's makes a lot of sense. I think LinkedIn is gaining in popularity quite a lot over the past few years, right? And I think now coming from the other perspective, right? So this is like you as a recruiting person or someone working at Proactive Global, really helping a company fill the roles. Now, if there is a candidate on the other hand, right, and they, let's say, let's first target maybe people who have certain level of experience, maybe a couple of years, they have been working at a company, they're looking for a switch, whatever. Um, and then they are not really active on LinkedIn or anything, right? But they probably have really good experience working at one or two companies before. So, do you think they're losing out if they are not active on LinkedIn, or do you just or do you think they should be posting a lot on LinkedIn? Do you think a good profile and a CV with a portfolio website or something is enough for recruiting specialists like yourself to get a sense of whether this would be a right candidate for a company or not?
Great question. I believe it depends how experienced the individual is that you mentioned, but in most cases, if you've got a lot of experience in the industry, you would typically know a lot of the competition, the competitors that you're coming up against in project bids, or who are located close in the area from a geographical point of view. So to answer your point, I don't think it's essential if you're a very experienced individual to have LinkedIn. You definitely don't need to be posting all the time. So I'd recommend a LinkedIn profile and being active, so individuals like myself and other recruiters can reach out. But I don't think you necessarily need to be posting every 5 minutes for sure. So that I'd answer that for experienced individuals. It's maybe not as critical, but that being said, it's really important to in my view anyway, to have a social media platform or presence, just because it simply just makes you accessible to more individuals. And even though you might really know the area, so if you're I don't know, a VP of sales or a robotics deployment engineer or anyone, if you're based in Atlanta or in Munich, in Graz, you would probably know most of the competitors. However, as we know in this space, there's a lot of startups coming up with some brilliant technology that you simply might not know of. So having that social media platform really helps.
Hmm. Yeah, it gets one be in touch with the market and the companies and so on. So that makes sense.
Mhm.
But do you think like if someone just has a good GitHub profile or they have their personal website and they do not really have any social media, do you still reach out to these individuals in certain ways? Of course, they are a bit hard to reach because their personal um, web page, whether it's through GitHub or whatever, is does not have the same reachability as one would have on a social media platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. We certainly would still reach out to them. It makes no difference to us how we find these individuals. But I think going back to the earlier point, it's just how easy it is,
Hmm.
to make yourself found, and not just for myself, but some organizations out there as well. So there are some clients and customers out there that don't necessarily partner with headhunters because they have quite a large social media platform. Boston Dynamics might be a very good example there. Where that they've got some really cool products. Their LinkedIn is flying, and I'm assuming they get quite a lot of applicants themselves. In which case, someone with no social media platform or presence might not necessarily get reached out to by someone at Boston
Uh-huh.
Dynamics. However, myself and other recruiters in a headhunting role, just because someone doesn't have a LinkedIn or a social media platform, of course we'd still reach out to them, like you say, either just if they post their CV on a local job board or their resume, sorry, or other areas. Like I said, they could be on a database where we spoke to them a year ago, for example. So they might not have LinkedIn, but they'd still be in our system.
Um, so touching on that and maybe um taking a different route there. So generally, I think a lot of companies do prefer hiring through recruitment agencies or such companies by external agencies. And do you think there is an advantage for the companies? Because I think I was in touch with recruiting agency person, and they mentioned that the companies save a lot of cost if they can hire someone through a recruiting agency rather than having to deal with all the candidate applications themselves. What are the advantages that a company has, and do you recommend candidates or someone, whether they're experienced or beginners, doesn't matter? Do you think they have a better chance at getting a job at a really good company if they go through recruitment agencies, or do you think applying via the official website is the best way, or do you think uh, applying via LinkedIn is the best way, or the standard job platforms? So maybe too many things. We can maybe slowly unwrap those.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll touch on the last point. It's a bit of a tricky one to give a definitive answer, but I definitely think partnering with a headhunter has some very very strong advantages, especially in a competitive space. It's our job as recruiters, or headhunters rather, to really network and to understand the client and build personal relationships with that organization. So, for example, if you see a great job on LinkedIn and apply, you're in a list of however many applicants, 20 to
Mm,
30 individuals. However, if you've been partnered with a headhunter, they're very, very in a close working relationship with the client or the hiring manager in this case, and then it's the headhunter's job to
mhm,
partner with the client to headhunt the top three or top four individuals based on that role and based on the relationship that they have. So it would then be on my job or my team's job, or our company's job rather, to say, hey, client, you said you need X job. I've headhunted three of the best people based on what you said. They fit your culture because X, Y, and Z. And here's some slots where they can interview. So because it's our job to network and to build those relationships and to really understand what the customer is looking for, that definitely provides an advantage in that sense for sure.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think this headhunting is the technical term that you use in your space, right? Could you
Mhm.
expand on that a bit? Like, what do you exactly mean by headhunting? It's just understand from our conversation the context that it's finding the right candidate or set of candidates for a particular role. Is there more to it?
Of course, and I'll keep going back to it. I think it's just networking and understanding the market. We touched on it just there about experienced individuals. If you're based in a location with a lot of startups or a lot of organizations that are well established, of course you're going to know a lot of them. But again, I touched on it before because of the vast amount of startups, new technologies, new companies that are coming to market. If you're an engineer just working the same place for the 5 to 6 years or however long, you're not going to necessarily know all of the new companies that are coming to the market where that's our job, right? So, as part of headhunting as a wider package, of course, the simplified explanation is we speak to our clients, find out their requirements, and then we find candidates for that job. But I think the networking piece around that, so that we understand the client's needs, expectations, the candidate's needs, is super important. And that's when you're applying on LinkedIn or applying for a website, you don't necessarily get that personal feel or that personal touch, right? So if a candidate, reaches out to us and says, this is the type of organization I want to work with. I want to work with this type of engineering manager. I want to work in this type of business. You don't necessarily get that from a website, from a cultural point of view, or from a LinkedIn application. And that's where, as I mentioned, the personal relationships from a headhunter really plays a
Mhm,
good part. And it works both ways. We can also be very transparent and say, this is what you said to me you're looking for. And based on what you've said, I don't think this client is a very good fit for you because of X, Y, and Z.
mm,
And that's also very, very, very beneficial to candidates, sorry, because they might only find that out in 6 months to a year's time and realize they made the wrong step. Whereas again, as I mentioned, we understand the culture, we understand the business. We'd say, hey, don't necessarily speak to this customer. I don't think it's right for you based on what you said, but I can introduce you to another customer who, or another
mhm.
client, sorry, who would be a lot more aligned with your values going forward.
Yeah. So in such a scenario where you find that the candidate is probably not the best fit for the company, and you would probably find or headhunt other candidates, do you think so do you also give feedback to the candidates? Because I'm sure they would be asking, because now It's not that they have applied on the website of a company. It's like you're talking to a person, right? So it's also about networking and knowing the person, kind of. So you've been in touch with the candidate for some time.
Absolutely, and that's you teed me up quite nicely. I appreciate that's a point that I didn't mention. So especially when you're applying online or through a website, you just get an automated email, right? Which I think is maybe better than what we were doing in the recruitment industry maybe 5 to 10 years ago when I first started, because you didn't get anything. So at least you get an automated email from a website, right? But as you mentioned, if the client has built the relationship with the recruiter, if the candidate built the relationship with the recruiter, it is absolutely our job to reach out and say, hey, this is why you went for an interview. I really appreciate your time, but here are 3 points as to why you didn't get it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know,
Yeah.
it's constructive feedback, and you can use that again in the next interview, or with another client. Whether you get that from a website or a LinkedIn application, I'm not exactly sure, but of course, as part of the after service, we would call it, in terms of providing consultative feedback and constructive feedback. That's really important, not only for us to understand our clients' needs, but also for candidates and individuals coming onto the market, to help find the right role in the future. Because unfortunately, you don't get the first role you apply for. Maybe some people do
Yeah.
if they're very fortunate, depending on their situation. But yeah, sometimes you have to apply for two, three, four jobs before you get the right one.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that absolutely makes sense, and I think you also need some interview experience, right? So you do need to get rejected a couple of times, and then you also understand what kind of companies you want to work for. So there are different companies of different sizes, startups, really established companies, companies that are kind of research oriented, companies that are totally industry specific and profit oriented. So I think once you apply for a lot of different roles, give a lot of interviews, you kind of get a sense of first of all what the job market is, and secondly maybe also where you lack, where your skills lack. And I think this is where probably it makes the most sense to reach or be in touch with a recruiting agency or a person from a recruiting agency, uh, because it would be a more honest and transparent communication that they say, hey, uh, your C++ skills are missing, or you need to do another project and so and so. And this is what like the companies are looking for at this time. Um, so now coming to beginners, like someone who has no experience, they're fresh out of grad school, and they probably have their master's degree completed, or they're probably still in the middle of their master's. They're looking for their first job position. That's obviously the hardest because you need to show some experience to get that position, but at the same time, you need that position to gain that experience. So it's kind of a chicken and egg problem. What would be your recommendation to such a candidate?
Absolutely, yeah. It's as you mentioned, it's a vicious circle. It's a revolving door, essentially, with needing experience and then not having experience, of course. Um, Firstly, my recommendation, it sounds maybe quite cliche, but it's really understanding firstly what type of role you want. And of course, you don't know what you don't know, but I think we mentioned previously about networking. For me, I definitely recommend it starts by just going to different automation or robotics or engineering based events, right? So we'll speak in off camera. So just in the next few weeks, you've got ProMats in America coming. You've got Logimat in Stuttgart. You've got Automatica in Munich. I think there's a mobile robotics summit as well in Dortmund. Etc. Go to these events as an attendee, and just start getting a feel for different technologies, about different organizations, speaking to some of the sales individuals on the booths, and really getting a feel of actually what type of organization or what type of product you want to work with. I think that's really important. Firstly, to understand what you're targeting, because previously what we mentioned, of course, you can go and speak to a headhunter and you can get access to these brilliant organizations, but unless you really understand the roadmap in terms of what you want and where you want your career to go, it's pretty pointless, right? So you need to really understand the type of organization, the type of culture, the type of product based environment where you want to work, and for me that starts with networking. So
Mm,
for a beginner, definitely I would start there. We touched on it earlier. I don't necessarily think you need a crazy LinkedIn profile and to be posting every 5 minutes. I think that's maybe a bit overdone, and that's not necessary. But starting with the networking, once you've got your roadmap, then potentially approaching recruiters or approaching the organizations that you would have met at certain events, um, and then reaching out to them and explaining your skills and experience, and then obviously taking it from there. Of course, part of being a beginner in the industry comes from putting down the experience that you've gained during your university studies or your internships, etc. Um, Sounds quite crazy, but again, we mentioned it off camera. The amount of individuals that would have an awesome degree or a master's or a bachelor's, whatever it is, in a specific, quite niche skill, but then they wouldn't necessarily define their specialism or the thesis that they did would actually be very, very relevant to the organization. So
Uh,
I think it's in terms of actually creating a CV or a cover letter or a resume, it's about really defining the experience you have and then tailoring it to said organization as well. I think that's quite a simple task that maybe gets lost. I see a lot of CVs, of course, it's our job that, just say degree in this at this university at this date,
hmm.
and you go, okay, well, if we're applying for an organization, we need a bit more, so that's definitely another point as well. So they're definitely the 2 points that spring to mind based on what you said.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because I think in companies you have specialized roles, right? Say computer vision engineer or manipulation lead, etc., etc. And generally, if you say that you did a master's in robotics or AI or data science, I think a lot of other people also did the same thing, and so you do not stand out. And also, the companies cannot really assess whether you would be able to fit in a particular role which is more specific. So I think this is also something that I talk about. I say find your niche within robotics because robotics is quite vast. And of course, everyone would have a specialization because, as you mentioned, they would do their thesis in a certain domain. So they should. So you recommend that they mention it and on the top of their CV that they have a specialization in so and so, um, based on their thesis, right?
Absolutely, but for people that maybe don't have such a niche or a specialism or a focus, as you mentioned, I don't think that's a bad thing per se. As we mentioned before, there's a lot of startups or new organizations that need someone that can wear a lot of different hats. They might be doing programming, they might be doing product development, they might be doing a bit of solutions, they might be doing a bit of sales. So I think it's actually a good selling point if you don't necessarily have a niche specialism to some organizations, because they would need you like I said, to wear a few different hats. And that's obviously good for your personal development as well, to be an all rounder, I guess. But on the flip side, there's also a number of larger organizations where they have very, very defined verticals or role functions, where if you have a niche in that role function you're applying for and you don't put it at the top of your CV, they might disregard your application in comparison to someone else. So it's
Okay.
it's super important to highlight that for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I have a lot of questions popping up. I think I'll try to take one at a time. Um, yeah, I think so. In terms of also just coming to beginners, so do you think they should aim towards getting a job first, or they should try to get like an internship or a part-time role at a company because that is easier and they could build their skills first and then because they probably do not have this specialization thing, right? And I'll also come back to that hopefully, in terms of whether it makes sense to be a bit spread out because it would be more appealing to startups, or to slowly start defining your niche if you want to be established in a domain. But coming to the first question is like, do you think internship would make sense? And also in internship, do you think one has to be specifically looking for a particular role? Like you mentioned that you have to first know what you want, but probably if you're looking for an internship, you do not know what you want. Do you think it's better to like do some projects and gain some clarity than apply for internships, or just try it out?
Yeah, it's a great question, one we come across a lot. I can't answer for everyone because everyone's situation is completely different. Maybe I'm a little bit biased because I came through at Proactive, my company, through an apprenticeship or an internship. But they're definitely such a good way to, like you say, get exposure into an organization. As I mentioned earlier, you don't know what you don't know. So the fact that you can get in there for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and get exposure to an organization and the different roles they propose, it's really something I think needs to be strongly considered. I mean, just very, very high level, but I mean, Boston Dynamics, you've got Google, you've got Amazon that have got very, very, very strong internship or apprenticeship programs. And again, you might not necessarily know, as we mentioned before, it's very easy for me to sit here and say, yeah, you need a roadmap, you need to network, you need to speak with different organizations and find out what you want to do. But as we alluded to earlier, there's so many different technologies, there's so many different startups, there's so many different avenues you can go into as a beginner. It's quite daunting and quite difficult. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with jumping into an internship, getting exposure to a real life working environment, and get exposure into different areas as well, which is of course the main functions of an internship. And then after that 6 months or 12-month period, then you can really understand, okay, this is what I do want to do or what I don't want to do. And this might be the company I want to stay with or I don't necessarily want to stay with as well. So
Yeah.
to answer your question, 100%, internships are a very, very good way to not only expose yourself into different areas, but to introduce yourself into the new world of robotics.
Hmm. And now specifically, so you mentioned about networking, and we've been talking a lot about networking in this conversation. Um, so someone who is fresh out of their university, they would go to a networking event. They are looking for internships or even a full-time job. Um what would the concrete steps look like for them? So do they print out their CV and give it to different companies? Do they target a few companies that might make more sense to them? Do they talk to recruiting agency companies, because probably you would also have a booth there? What would be a more efficient use of their time, because probably they're there for a day or two?
So that's a great question. I haven't heard the phrase print out CVs and give it hand it out to your clients in person in a long time. Maybe when I started 8 years ago, we used to do this.
Uh-huh.
It's a dying art, with the wonderful world of Teams and Zoom and interviews and things like that. You don't see it that often. So I think to answer your question, a combination of all of them has to be done. I don't think, as I will keep alluding to, not one size, not one way fits all, or works exactly the same. So a good balance and a combination of all of them. As I mentioned just now, it's a very old school, I think, a lost art, right? Just printing out your CV and going, here is what I've done, handing it to a potential employer, or engineering or hiring manager you'd like to work for. I mean, that's a really good personal touch. They can physically see your experience, and like I said, in the world of viewing resumes or CVs online or on Zoom calls and things like that, really adds a good element, in my opinion. But it's got to be a combination. So you've got to do that. Recruiters would have a booth at most of these events, so speaking to them as well about finding out what roles are in demand, what should I be going for, what clients should I be speaking for. Every recruiter would be happy to give that advice for free. Um, and then it's about walking around and maybe just prospecting different organizations and just speaking to them spontaneously, connecting with them on LinkedIn. They might not have something now, but then they might do in a few months' time. Sounds like a bit of a long task, but there's nothing wrong with doing all of those 3 points. And even on the last point I mentioned, just putting a reminder in your diary in 2 or 3 months' time, and then reconnect with that person. But like, hey, we met at X events. It was really good. I love your technology. I know you didn't have anything at the time, but would love to reach out and work with you in the future. So again, sounds maybe quite a long and tedious task, and that is the role of a headhunter, to hopefully take most of that pain away. But there's
Hmm.
nothing wrong with doing some of that yourself as well, and developing. It's your career at the end of the day, so it's really important.
Yeah, so I mean, one has to put in some efforts, right? At the end of
Of
the day,
course,
they say that looking for a job can be a full-time job in itself, because
absolutely.
so it depends obviously on a lot of different factors such as your work experience, etc. But it generally is a very time-consuming thing, right?
Of course, and that's ultimately why we and my business and other businesses in the
Hmm.
recruitment and the headhunting world have a job, because it's very time consuming for someone to sit there, especially if you have a job, to search for another
True.
role. It's very time consuming, and I'm sure someone in the comments or someone will prove me wrong, and they've just graduated university, they've applied for Boston Dynamics, and they got an internship and got a job, and I'm sure they're happy there and will work there for the rest of their lives. So there's always exceptions to the
Yeah.
rule, but yeah, in general, it's very, very tough. It is basically a full-time job to search for a job. So obviously that's the benefit of ourselves as a headhunter. But yeah, to manage expectations, it's not always easy, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of getting your application shortlisted by, let's say, a recruiting agency or a company, so you mentioned that one has to mention the specialization or the particular domain that one is interested in or one is involved in for the past couple of months or years. What else do you think is important to mention on a CV? And what do you think is totally useless that one
Oh,
mentions regularly on the CV but it doesn't play too much of a role?
yeah, it's a great point. So, firstly, I think a cover letter is so important, especially for a graduate or a beginner that's getting into the robotics and the automation world. By cover letter, I mean it literally can be a separate letter to your resume, or it can even just be, two or three, maybe not even three, but two paragraphs just on the top of your CV as to
Ah,
why you
okay.
want to work, why you want to work for that business. I don't necessarily think it needs to be as extensive, like I said, as a full cover letter. If you have the time, then great, but it's quite time consuming to do that. So I think just keeping your original CV and just adding a paragraph or two at the top and say, giving an informal introduction, so hey, this is me, this is why I'm applying for your role, this is what I've seen about your business that I'm really keen on, this is what I studied at university, and I think it's very suitable to what you've mentioned, and just giving a bit of a warmer introduction. I think that personal approach and that it shows that you've done your research, and I think every hiring manager or HR manager that reviews that application will go, brilliant.
Hmm.
And for maybe doubling down on my point again, I can't say it all, but sometimes cover letters can be too long.
Yeah.
If you think you're a busy individual, especially if you're a CFO, a CEO of a robotic startup or a founder, you've got a lot of other tasks on your plate. You probably don't have time to look through 10 CVs and 10 cover letters, so sometimes they might get missed. So I think
Hmm.
adding a short summary at the top of your original CV is definitely a really good step to make you stand out. As for your second point, I wouldn't want to stick my foot in it too much. It's a good question. Personally, I would always avoid, and what we see quite a lot is hobbies and interests. I know it sounds maybe quite crazy, but I don't necessarily see the value add. In my opinion, only negative can come from it rather than positive, right? So,
Okay.
if you put in there, I don't know, Bayern Munich supporter or Manchester United supporter, and I go to every game. I have a season ticket, and the individual that's hiring you supports the rival team. I know it sounds very crazy, but subliminally, right? You're on the back
Hmm.
foot already. I know it does sound crazy, but it's generally how it works. I do this job daily, and you can put yourself on the back foot without even realizing. So, it's a very silly and crude example. Of course, that's probably not going to be the deal breaker of why you do or don't get a job. But
But
like we said, in a
unconsciously,
competitive
because
market,
you're still
yeah,
dealing
you're
with
unconscious
humans,
bias.
right? So.
Exactly, right. You have an unconscious bias, so it's really important to take these things into consideration. On the flip side, it can really work in your favor. If I've got
Hmm.
a passion in photography or playing the guitar, I don't know, and the other individual has the same, then you might kick off on the right foot. But I've only ever seen more negative than positive when it comes to putting that. I just
Really?
think it's a point.
Okay.
It takes you 20 seconds to put it in, but I generally think it can harm your application. Like I said, not drastically,
Hmm.
but it will definitely give you put you on the back foot or the front foot, depending if it's good or bad. So I would remove that. I think your experience needs to speak for itself, which it should do on a CV and a cover letter. And as I mentioned, if you're networking and going to these events, you can build a personal relationship with them. So you don't need to put your hobbies or interests on the CV, right? Because you're engaging with them, you've had a coffee with them, you can
Uh-huh.
share them mutually. So maybe a bit controversial. I could be wrong. But that's my view.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. I
Mm.
mean, also, probably at the end of the day, hobbies and interests are something that you would figure out. I mean, you would probably share with the person once you're working with them, you would through small talk and things like that. And that is not supposed to be a critical factor, right? Because skills and other things would be important, but if there is something that really stands out that that is an interest of yours that probably wouldn't be an advantage for you. Um,
Absolutely, but that's a bit tongue in cheek. I was being maybe a bit of a silly example, but it really is
but it
a
proves
real
the
life
point.
point, and
It
this
shows
is
the point that you were trying to make. Yeah.
exactly, and this is what we do as a job. But I think another one, and on more of a serious sense, is the length of your CV.
Uh-huh.
I think that can put employers off so much. As we mentioned, it's really, really vital to get, especially if you don't have much experience, if you've just graduated, it's really important to really emphasize the experience you have and go into detail and really specify why you're suitable for that company. And on the flip side, as I mentioned earlier, CEOs of it or a founder of a robotics startup, if they've already got 20 applicants and your CV is 8 or 9 pages long, they're not going to read it. They're going to get bored
Uh,
after the first page or two. So I think really it's striking that balance between finding or highlighting rather, sorry, your experience you have and going into detail, but just not making your CV 8 or 9 pages long. It's not needed. So whether you break that up and maybe into subsections and you just put, here's my experience on the first 2, 3 pages. If you're interested, then here's my product portfolio. This is my thesis. This is my specialism at university in another document or in a sub document. That's maybe a good idea. But having a long CV would definitely not go down well in a startup environment anyway.
hmm. So what is the optimal length for a CV? Is it one page? Some people say it should be strictly one page, or is 2 pages enough, or can it go up to three even, or what would you suggest?
Actually, depends how much experience you have, of course. I would personally say that one is too short because you need a bit of detail, right? Especially if you've worked at different companies before. I'd expect more than 1 page. So I'd say 2 to 4 is necessary. I think once you again, if you've been in the industry for maybe 20 years, then of course your CV might be 5 pages long, of course. But I think 2 to 4 is really the sweet spot in
Yeah.
terms of what I see. And again, that just comes down to attention span. That comes down to getting your experience across in the right way, etc. But that's the sweet spot in my opinion.
Mhm. But I mean, you also mentioned that recruiters or the people who shortlist the CV, they do, and the documents, they do not have that much time, right? So even 2 to 4 pages can be a disadvantage sometimes, do you think? Because I don't know how much time one spends on uh, one candidate. It's probably a few seconds, right? Maybe 1 minute. I don't know.
Yes, it's a really good stat. I can't remember the exact figure. I should probably know this, but I'm pretty sure the average recruiter, maybe not necessarily organization, but in my industry, I believe it's 20 seconds we spend on average
Really?
looking at a CV.
Oh, okay.
And maybe that 20 seconds, obviously it's not a long time, that strikes people to be quite brave and quite outlandish with their CVs and putting kind of pictures and diagrams and loads of colors. I don't think it's that's necessarily needed. So that number sounds quite daunting, but it's our job. We know what we like. I said, we build the relationship with the client. We know what they're looking for. So yeah, we only need 20 seconds to look through the CV and see if it's appropriate for that applicable client. But yeah, you're right. Again, going back to the point of a startup or even a large organization, you're not going to be looking through every resume for 5 to 10 minutes. So
Yeah.
you need to really make it short and precise to keep that engagement for sure.
And do you think there are the automatic CV filters that would look for the keywords and automatically reject or accept the applications? I think these are probably quite well adopted, right, in the industry. How much of a role does that play, and what should someone keep in mind when creating their CV so that they're not rejected because of a stupid mistake, like not mentioning the important keywords or something like that?
The use of AI in general in the world is coming up a lot, and especially when it comes to CV screening. I guess that's technically one of our direct competitors because that would essentially negate our job. So we're seeing a lot at the moment. So it's here. It's probably not going to go away. And like you mentioned, I think we need to be clever when we're making our CVs or resumes or cover letters, so we're not rejected by an AI tool. I think the biggest points that I see when I've looked into or researched AI tools is in the skills. So the keywords they would pick out would be in the skills, right? So whether that is a certain project management qualification, whether that is a certain robotics programming software, whether that's a certain AI tool that you've worked on, right? I don't know, it might be Java, C++, Python, SQL, I don't know, whatever it is. I think really highlighting just bullet points of what skills, what tools you've worked on, what technologies you've been involved in. I think that's really important to be accepted by AI tools, if that's the right word. But again, I think why I'm not the biggest fan on AI tools versus using recruiters, it's very easy to slip up, as you mentioned, right? And you maybe phrase a type of programming language in the way that the tool doesn't understand, and then it might not necessarily put you forward to the hiring manager, which is really unfair. And of course, having that human touch and that human understanding of working with a recruiter or networking yourself, that completely eliminates that, So, and I've even heard some cases when it comes down to the spelling, right? If you're applying using an American AI platform, obviously
Oh,
like Z's and S's and things like that, it can completely reject your application. You might have put the right tool, but the American English just didn't pick it up, and then you've lost out on a potential interview. So
oh,
again, that I think that highlights the point of networking yourself and networking with recruiters. But answering your question, just really being clear, bullet pointing the skills that you have gained or you are willing to gain is really important.
okay, wow, that's fascinating and scary at the same time, because
It is.
just because of spelling mistake or that you write a bit differently, you miss out on certain job opportunities there. Um, do you use AI tools for your work? Do you think that makes your job easier? I mean, you also mentioned that AI is probably your biggest competitor. Uh, what do you think about that?
So, of course, I mean, I think it's naive. Everyone in probably the world at the moment is using AI in some way, shape, or form. So, whilst the main function of that point you mentioned is our competition, of course, we use it more in the back end side, though, to streamline processes and to make our lives easier. But essentially, our day to day, we really use that human touch, right? So, if someone is sending me their CV, I am looking through it myself. Again, I know it sounds daunting. I'm only looking at it for 20 seconds, but I've been doing it for 8 years. I know what my client looks for. So I only need 20,
Uh-huh.
30 seconds to analyze the skills, and I'll give you constructive feedback off the back of that. But no, in the front end of our business, I would say. So looking at the CVs, identifying the skills, presenting that to the hiring manager. We don't necessarily use AI in that part. Maybe that will change. I don't know. But definitely in terms of the back office side of our business, the stuff that goes on behind the scenes to enable us to spend time looking at the CVs. Of course, we're utilizing a lot of AI, a lot of different technologies to make life easier. I think that's what it's there for.
Yeah, it makes you more productive at the job. I
Exactly.
don't know if you've seen these videos of AI avatars who act as human resource person and they're interviewing the candidates. I don't know if you've
I
seen
actually
those.
haven't. No, do you know
No,
what? I actually
really?
haven't. No,
Okay.
no, no.
So
Okay.
it's
Ah.
you've seen like these human-looking AI models that talk and speak like humans and everything. So
Yeah, yeah.
there have been, I think, a lot of maybe startups are experimenting with these. That there's a recruiting person who looks like an actual human, but they have like I don't know Chat GPT or some AI tool in the back end, and they are asking questions in the real time and they're analyzing what the other person is speaking. They're on a video call like you would be on a normal interview, and it answers in real time. I think it's a bit it's not effective first of all, and it's a bit strange. But I
Mm.
don't know what your views on that are. Do you think that could be an interesting thing to explore for recruiting for people in the recruiting space, let's say in the future, or do you think that's just a marketing fad?
Yeah, I'd say more the latter, to be completely honest with you. I think that's yeah, that's not clickbait, but I think that's just a bit of unnecessary hype. I couldn't necessarily see that in the world that we operate in, kind of having mass adoption. I'm just thinking if I was in a candidate's shoes, if I'm looking for a job and I'm being interviewed by a humanoid or an AI tool. I don't know if I'd necessarily like that. Again, you join a company in most cases, of course, to be cool products and a great vision, but you join for the people. I think that's so important. And if you're getting interviewed straight off the bat, not by a person, I don't
Yeah.
know, I'm old fashioned, but I wouldn't necessarily have that as the best candidate experience when applying for a job. But I could be wrong. But no, for me, I don't necessarily see the value in that. But yeah, maybe in the future it could be adopted. I think as a screening tool, like you said, there's negatives to it, but maybe it could be adopted there. But I think holding formal interviews, not personally, is could be a big detriment to your organization. I'm not going to lie, and I think as well. Again, it really depends on what roles, but when you're getting, I think from a health and safety point of view, right? When you're a hands-on engineer, you're responsible for programming or maintaining or installing certain applications. I don't know how an AI based tool or platform, or however you phrase it, would mitigate that risk. You know, if you're on site as an engineer and you program something wrong, or you commission something wrong, or you test something wrong, and there's an issue on site, I'd like to say through a personal or humanized recruitment process, they could analyze your skills, analyze your qualifications, and ensure that all the risk assessments and health and safety risks are adhered to. Maybe I'm a bit naive. Maybe an AI based chat system can do that as well, but that would be my biggest concern. It's probably from a health and safety point of view with on-site individuals, the big risk there.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. On the
Mm,
other hand, I mean, this was about the AI interviewer, let's say.
mm.
But if the interviewer is human, on the other hand, the candidates might also be using AI tools to cheat in the interview. So there is another. Maybe I need to stop spending too much time on LinkedIn. But I came across another post where the the interviewee was actually it. He had a new tab or window open on their browser, and that was parsing every instruction that was given, and it was generating responses, and it was simply reading it out. And of course you could make it seem like you are speaking it, because I mean it's just open on the screen. So that was also interesting, but these are, I think, possibilities that would be probably more real than the one that we talked about.
I mean, yeah, it works both ways, right? If organizations are using AI interview tools, then candidates can use the same AI tool to answer the questions from the AI tool from the organization. You know, so it works in a complete circle. Maybe it'd be used more on a candidate point of view for sure. If they're applying for a job, you can pull up this AI platform and it can answer the questions for you. That's awesome. So yeah, it's probably something that will come up a lot. I guess the only way to get around that is to from an organization point of view, if you're hiring, because again that's a big risk, especially from a health and safety point of view. Again, I'll relate back to on-site or more hands-on engineering individuals. Maybe it wouldn't be the same as in the sales or the project department per se, but a huge health and safety risk. You know, if an AI platform or tool is saying you can do things that you can't, and then
Yeah.
something happens on site, and there's a lot of repercussions to that. So yeah, it's just a scary time, an interesting time, but a scary time for sure. But again, I think from both sides, doing things in person, I might be a bit old fashioned and a bit old school, but I think utilizing, I think we do very well. You know, you're sat in Germany, I'm in the UK, we're doing this on Skype or Zoom or Teams. You can save a lot of time interviewing and applying for jobs online for sure. But it needs to be that face to face interaction to legitimize the process.
Yeah, at least one round in the process would should be, and it generally is also, right, where the candidate visits the company, and it's a more human experience there.
Yeah, there's been a really just on that point, it's been a really interesting shift since COVID, where
Yeah.
obviously 95% of the people we found jobs, they didn't actually technically, and we hired in our business as well. We hired so many
Oh.
people obviously in COVID times without physically meeting them, you know, because we weren't allowed to. So obviously that works. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think the world is probably shifting more towards being in person. A lot of the organizations we recruit for were, you know, completely hybrid. They're now just encouraging people to come back into the office. I know Microsoft announced that they're doing the same, Facebook as well, I believe. So I think the world is kind of shifting where acknowledging that hybrid working and flexibility is really important, but yeah, you can't replicate in-person interactions, being in the
Mhm.
office, etc. So I think that's really important to consider.
Yeah, that's true. I think after COVID,
Mm,
things are a bit different. I think
mm.
people we trust more online interactions as well, and we leverage the power of technology in our day-to-day endeavors. I think one, maybe before I forget, one last or one final set of questions that I wanted to ask was about coding interviews. Actually, so there are these coding challenges that are given, and these could be time-driven coding challenges where it's like lead code or hacker rank style problems. Um, And nowadays, the thing is that these can be easily done with the help of AI tools much quickly, because these are more fundamental questions, right? Um, and I think at least so last year I was in the job application phase. I was applying actively, and I noticed that a lot of companies still emphasize on that, and they still give that as an interview round. You know, the coding challenge round. It could also be just a take home assignment, but generally there is some kind of coding challenge of some sort. Do you think um, because of the AI tools and because of programming assistive tools, this um, coding round is a bit redundant, or it could be defined a bit better? Or do you think lead code is still something that is important? And also, based on your experience, how many companies do prefer this sort of way of assessing the candidate skill, or some other way of evaluating their technical skills?
Great question, and I think it leads on nicely from what we just mentioned there. I would definitely say in the prior years after COVID, we were very much, yeah, you'd get sent an assessment or you'd get sent something online, and then the repercussions of that is it's easy to use an AI platform or to cheat essentially, you know.
Yeah.
So what we're definitely seeing in the market now, and it's not necessarily a coding based test or assessment, but even a lot of organizations that we recruit for do like personality or cultural based questions as well. They're very popular. Even assessments in that sense that maybe aren't technically focused, sorry, they're shifting to be in person, as we just mentioned
Ah,
earlier.
I see.
So whether that's a team's call for the first two stages, yes, you're successful. Come into our office and even spend half a day from a coding point of view. We'll give you a practical task, do it in person or do it in the office. Again, it's quite time consuming, but I'd like to say if your interview process is thorough from the first two stages on Teams, you should be pretty set on this individual. So spending 3 or 4 hours with them, giving them a practical task, you don't have to be sat there watching over them, but at least you know they're maybe not necessarily using an AI based platform to cheat, right? I think that's definitely the narrative that we're seeing with a lot of our organizations going forward, based on what you mentioned, because there's so many different AI based platforms and tools that can
Mm-hmm.
aid you when completing a test. So that's the trend we're seeing at the moment.
Uh-huh. But do you think these tests are essential? Because I think a lot of companies also allow you to use AI tools for programming. Um, do you think these tests are essential, or are they really indicators at assessing someone's skills in programming? Of course, I think the fundamentals have to be there, because without it, you're just copying and pasting from an AI tool, and you don't, if you don't understand it, you're not really building anything. Um, or do you think there are better indicators of that? Or maybe I think a more practical question would be, um, what are the companies preferring to use or considering to use in the future, to deal with the AI side of things?
Great question again. I think you almost stole my answer in kind of what you mentioned there, but we're definitely seeing a lot in the startup space as well. A lot of my customers say, I'm hiring will over skill, right? So it's about the drive of the person, it's about the ambition, and it's about their
Mm-hmm.
values. Of course, like you mentioned, the fundamentals and the basics have to be there for you to obviously to train that individual. But well, personally with my clients, what we're seeing these tests, they're more just an indication, as you mentioned, of the individual's skill set, right? So whether that's they're stronger in this area or this area, that means when you're developing them or when you're putting your training plan in place, you can see the test, you can see how they perform, so you can tailor it more to their inabilities, and then you can strengthen that going forward. So rather than it being a pass or fail, I think we're definitely seeing it as more of a guide as to how organizations can train that individual, which I think is how they should be used for. Of course, the fundamentals and the basic skills need to be there, but more of a guide is how we're seeing. Um, as you mentioned there, I think in my opinion, I'm with on the same page as a lot of what our customers are saying. So the fundamentals need to be there, but you need to really just see if the person behind that test is who you want in your business.
Mm-hmm.
You can train any platform, any programming language, any sales technique,
Yeah.
I believe to a certain extent, of course. If that person doesn't have the right ambition, the right values that you want in your business, then it's a pointless exercise.
Hmm. Yeah, skills are trainable, right? And but
Of course.
values of a person, I think they are probably more rigid. So that makes a
Absolutely,
lot of sense.
absolutely. And maybe when we keep relating to the battle of not the battle, but the balance between a startup and a larger organization, what
Hmm.
the differences could be. In some cases, the startup I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to contradict myself, they need someone that can wear a few different hats. But also on the flip side, if they're hiring for a very niche skill set, and maybe a startup doesn't have the luxury
Hmm.
to take someone and give them ample amounts of training because there might only be 5 to 10 people in that business. And in which case, you might be better off applying to a large organization where they could send you to a different country on training courses and
Uh-huh.
really develop your skills. And so that's also a factor to consider as well.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. To wind off, maybe. I mean, we talked a lot about networking and about how to prepare your CV and stuff like that. What is the one advice that you would give to a beginner who wants to, start working for a major robotics company such as Boston Dynamics or, Agility Robotics or, any major company that they might be interested in?
For me, and it's my ethos in terms of my work life. And again, it's maybe light-hearted, which reflects on me. I think it's just about having fun. So it's about identifying an organization that is genuinely you find fun or you
Hmm.
enjoy waking up and going to work for. The rest, it's not irrelevant. Of course, there's so many other factors like work, geographical locations, whatever, salary, of course. But if you're
Hmm.
not having fun, you're not learning. If you're not learning, you're not growing. So I think it just generally comes down to defining a really, really, really driven organization that you're passionate or will be passionate for working for, and then just growing from there.
Okay, yeah, just discovering what you are interested in and finding an organization that aligns with that culturally, but also technically, is
Of
what
course,
you
and then
mentioned.
hopefully the rest should take care of itself. There's so much growth in this space. So I think if you can get yourself the foot in the door in an organization, you can happily spend 10 to 15 years growing in different roles, doing different things, and taking your career to the next level.
Yeah, yeah. I think what I take from this conversation is that, I mean, of course, someone who is applying for an engineering role, they probably do care about the technical skill set, right? And they probably do have the
Absolutely.
fundamentals, and if they don't, they probably know that they need to build that. I don't know, TensorFlow experience if it's a machine learning role and so on. But the point that you emphasized on is the people side of things, the networking, and that a lot of times you are dealing with people in a business, whether you're working with your supervisor, manager in a company, or with customers. Um, and the role that networking plays is really underestimated because I think a lot of times someone who is technically oriented just thinks that, hey, I just need to fill these particular skills set that are required, so I'll just spend a couple of months building that experience and just apply. Of course that is important, but if one does not expose themselves to the right opportunities in terms of knowing the right people, networking, applying at the right places, reaching out to the right recruiting agencies, then regardless of how good their skills are, they probably do miss out and they do not get as many opportunities that they would, right?
Absolutely, and I think that just highlights what we do as a business. So I'm hoping I've given a very good account in terms of the personal side, in terms of the relationship development, because that's the job of a recruiter. I'm not intelligent enough to be an engineer myself, unfortunately, so I've chosen a different path. But of course, you've highlighted the technical requirements that are needed and how you can develop there. But I think it's really important, and that's more our job to really focus on that, on the personal side, on the networking side, and the relationship development side as well. So hopefully, with my personal side and your engineering knowledge, we've given a good account for beginners and intermediary as to how to get a job in the world of robotics.
Yeah, awesome. It was really incredible. Thanks a lot for sharing your experience and your perspective. I think different perspectives combined together really, give a more bigger or more clearer picture than one would have otherwise. So I think it was really a nice conversation. Thanks a lot for agreeing to be on the podcast, and I'm looking forward to another podcast with you in the future, maybe on a different topic or on a similar tangent. I don't know. Um, but yeah, thanks a lot for being on the podcast, and I wish you all the best for your role, and I hope you keep on making progress with your own podcast. I know you have your own podcast, which you're also actively growing, and yeah, we'll keep in touch.
I said it's been a pleasure. Yeah, as I mentioned, it's weird being on this side of the podcast table. Normally, I'm the interviewer as well. But no, it's the first time doing a podcast, not being the interviewer. So I appreciate the opportunity. And yeah, let's reconnect and do a Mark two in a few months' time and see how the world has changed because it's changing changing every month.
Mhm. Yeah, really awesome.